Lastly, UNRWA, give us a sense of like how devastating the Senate just passed a part of like an aid package, military, really a weapons package,
Yeah,
a prohibition on funding UNRWA.
yeah.
Contextualize for us like how devastating is that within the context of Gaza that UNRWA is unable or will soon run out of its capacity to help people there.
You know, these 9 or 10 countries that decided to pause the funding to UNRWA, and that bill that came out that was passed by the Senate recently, I mean, this is insanity. I mean, I don't understand, what sort of disconnect the people who are making these decisions are dealing with. I mean, you are talking essentially about cutting off the lifeline to 2.3 million people in the Gaza Strip, all of whom are dependent on what UNRWA does. All of them rely on the aid of UNRWA being distributed. In the north, one of the few aid agencies that has been able to access the north of Gaza has been UNRWA. And actually, 3 or 4 days ago, one of their trucks came under fire as they were trying to deliver the aid. UNRWA has over 165 shelters, 4 times over capacity right now in the Gaza Strip. I mean, you can walk into one of these shelters and there's no way that you could take 10 steps without bumping into somebody. They're distributing meals to those people. They're distributing whatever medications they're able to get. They're providing them shelter. UNRWA is providing life to the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip right now. And to talk about which are very serious allegations about these 12 employees that may have participated in October 7th. I understand that. But to pause funding, I mean, this is insanity. It's sadistic. It's cruel. It's callous. And there is no way that you can justify doing that to the entire population of the Gaza Strip, to all of the Palestinians that are living there. UNRWA was a refuge during the war. I mean, literally, all you would do is ask, where is the UNRWA shelter in Khan Younis? Or where is UNRWA's buildings in Rafah? And you would go there and you would try to find a place to stay. Nobody would turn you away. All you had to do was find a corner that you and your family could sleep in. And now we're talking about cutting off and pausing funding and not being able for them to be able to resume their services past February. I mean, what do we expect to happen? This is all happening while there are military operations being conducted, while the last most densely populated spot in Gaza and Rafah is being attacked, and there's going to be a military offensive there. We're talking about stopping funding for an aid agency that is on the ground. I can't imagine how they made this decision. I mean, this is ridiculous. It's so infuriating because what is the alternative here? There is nobody else that can do UNRWA's work on the ground. All of the agencies combined that are working in the Gaza Strip cannot do what UNRWA does on a daily basis. We are not going to be able to make up what they do. And instead, we're talking about shutting them down totally, dismantling this aid agency in the midst of one of the worst humanitarian crises and a very tough war that's taking place with no end in sight. I mean, I don't know when there's going to be a ceasefire. The future looks bleak already, and UNRWA is operating. What about when UNRWA is done? So, this is something that all of these people who are making these decisions have to be held accountable for this. I mean, you are participating in this humanitarian crisis. You are essentially a part of the problem. You're not a part of the solution.
I know as you either entered or exited from Rafah, you saw huge lines of vehicles with aid. What is inhibiting those from getting in?
I didn't get a straightforward answer, so I'll just tell you what I think. We know that prior to the war, the Gaza Strip needed 500 of these trucks entering. That's what it took to sustain one day in the Gaza Strip. You needed 500 trucks to enter. During the war, the first 3 weeks, that number was 0. We know that it was totally cut off. Since then, we're at the highest level of trucks entering per day, and that number is at about 100 of these trucks. Talking to the leaders on the ground who are part of these aid agencies, they're saying we need 1,000 of those trucks during this wartime. All right. What I know is that these trucks show up in Egypt and they get inspected 5 or 6 times. Then they get sent to Israel to be inspected one last time at the Karam Shalom crossing. And instead of entering into the Gaza Strip, most of these trucks are sent back to Egypt and then asked to cross into Rafah from Egypt. And so part of the problem is that entire process is this bottleneck that doesn't allow the appropriate amount of trucks to enter. And then the other part of this, where there is a delay, is that during some of these inspections, many of the things that are supposed to enter are suddenly told, hey, this is prohibited from entering. And I'll give you one example from the medical world. We have plenty of people with fractures of bones, plenty of people who fractured their jaws or their vertebrae, and they need screws and plates, metal screws and metal plates to repair those injuries. That is prohibited from entering, whether it's from Israel or from Egypt. It's prohibited from entering. Since the start of the war, people with those injuries have not been able to have those surgeries, and those trucks are sitting outside of the border waiting to enter. For whatever reason, those kinds of things that for medical supplies are not allowed to enter. They're on this list of things that cannot enter. And that goes down to food items as well, too. There are certain food items that are not allowed to enter. If you talk to the Egyptians, they say it's the Israelis that are stopping this. And if you talk to the Israelis, they're saying it's the Egyptians. And if you ask me, it's both of them. I mean, they're both a part of the problem of getting stuff inside.
I guess lastly, what can people who are listening, what can we do? I mean, I think, aside from trying to agitate on our own country to, use its leverage for a ceasefire and to allow UNRWA to, at least attempt to fulfill its task. Like, what else can we do?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about this a lot, and I think it's going to require multiple things. I think, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share some of the stories of these Palestinians that are on the ground in the Gaza Strip. I think that's important. I think there's been this sort of campaign to dehumanize some of the people in the Gaza Strip. We get lost in the numbers. And the more that we're able to share their stories and their plights on our social media platforms or with programs like the Majority Report, I think that makes a difference. I think additionally, being able to support organizations that are on the ground, whether it's financially or volunteering with them, that makes a huge difference. It goes a very, very long way. Finally, all of these different actions, just calling for people to mobilize, whether it's a protest in front of the American Medical Association, like that's taking place today in Chicago, or it's asking your union to call for a ceasefire. I think all of these things matter. The Chicago City Council passed a resolution supporting a ceasefire. I think that makes a difference, especially knowing that the DNC is coming to town in the summer in Chicago. I think them understanding that a city like Chicago, the people want a ceasefire, I think that's important. And finally, and I've dealt with this with my own elected officials, I'm not political, so you have to excuse some of my ignorance, but just kind of demanding that they do better. I mean, I talked to my senators in Illinois, as well as my congressmen. They all they're going to be supporting this bill, the aid package that's been placed. They definitely are supporting the war. But I want them to also answer for the humanitarian crisis that's taking place. Okay, I get it. You want to support the war. There's nothing I can say to convince you otherwise. Maybe you're getting, some donations from somewhere that's swaying you this way. I want you to make a difference on the ground. I mean, the Jordanians are doing airdrops in Gaza of medical supplies. The U.S. can do that. The French are sending floating ships to the Gaza Strip and the Mediterranean so that people can be taken care of. The U.S. can do that. I mean, we can play a vital role, I think, in alleviating some of the suffering that's taking place in Gaza. And of course, a ceasefire is the most necessary step. But I don't see a lot of motivation in our country from our elected officials to really take a stance. So I want to hold them accountable for every aspect that's taking place here, and I want them to try and make a difference. And so I think there's plenty of ways that we can do something, and I hope that soon that there can be some sort of resolution. I hope that there can be some sort of reprieve. And I know, I'll tell you, the people in the Gaza Strip were more optimistic than I am. Just speaking to them on a daily basis, there was a rumor that a ceasefire was taking place while I was there. As I was leaving in Rafah, there was a rumor that, hey, there's a 30-day ceasefire. And Sam, you should have seen the streets. I mean, people celebrating, kids whistling, people hugging each other. It was so tragic to find out that this was just a rumor that had spread through the camps that, ultimately was not the case. And I think about those people celebrating in the streets now that there might be a military offensive taking place in Rafah. And I want us to be able to do whatever we can and shout as loud as we can to people who will listen to us that please, let's stop another chapter in this humanitarian crisis and tragedy taking place. And I hope something can give.
I don't think that people realize I certainly hadn't heard about the French, floating support or Jordanian airdrops. I mean, I think I don't know that, people are even aware that can take place. And so that is, it's helpful to know that, at least in terms of what we can demand of our government. What organizations on the ground do you think that people should be looking toward to provide support to?
Yeah, I mean, there's many of them. I'll mention, of course, Med Global is the organization I work with. They have an office in Gaza Strip. The Palestinian American Medical Association is on the ground. ANERA, ANERA, does incredible work with food and shelter and hygiene products. There is also PCRF, the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. There is, of course, UNICEF and UNRWA. UNRWA is looking for donations now from people. I mean, of course, they're doing incredible work. So anybody that's on the ground, I would say that's what I would caution listeners. There's a lot of people who are going to try to, collect funds and donations for the Gaza Strip. Just look for who's on the ground, who has an office there, who was operating before the war. Those are the people that are on the ground. They have credibility with the population that's in the Gaza Strip, and they know where the aid needs to go.
Dr. Thayer Ahmad, emergency room physician assistant program director at the Advocate Christ Emergency Medical Residency Program, and obviously working with Med Global. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it, and just really admire the work that you've done. And my heart goes out to you, and obviously everyone that you had to work with and there. But thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you, Sam. I appreciate it.